Richard Lawson adjusted his silk tie in front of the full-length mirror in his penthouse. The reflection showed an impeccably dressed middle-aged man, gray hair at his temples contrasting with his tailored Italian suit. His eyes, however, betrayed a restlessness that not all the money in the world could calm. Downstairs, the sounds of the party in full swing echoed through the apartment. It was yet another celebration of the success of his technology company, Lawson Innovations. Richard took a deep breath, rehearsing his successful tycoon smile before heading downstairs to join the guests. As he entered the main hall, he was immediately engulfed by a wave of enthusiastic greetings and pats on the back. Executives, investors, and local celebrities crowded around him, all eager to have a moment with the man who had revolutionized the tech industry in recent years. "Richard, my man," exclaimed Nathaniel Blackwood, a longtime investor. "Another exceptional quarter. You really have the Midas touch." Richard smiled mechanically, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. "Thanks, Nate. It's a team effort, as always." As he navigated his way through the crowd, exchanging pleasantries and discussing the latest market trends, Richard felt an uncomfortable familiarity settle in. It was as if he was watching himself from the sidelines, playing the role of the charismatic tycoon everyone expected him to be. It was then that his eyes landed on a young couple in the corner of the room. They were engrossed in each other, laughing and talking intimately, oblivious to the hubbub around them. For a moment, Richard found himself transported back in time, remembering similar moments with Sarah, his ex-wife. A pang of regret hit him, so sudden and acute that he almost dropped his glass. Images of Sarah and their daughter Emily flooded his mind. Picnics in the park, cozy evenings watching movies, Emily's laughter echoing through the house. He shook his head, trying to push the memories away. "Are you all right, Mr. Lawson?" asked a voice next to him. It was Amelia, his personal assistant, looking at him with concern. Richard quickly pulled himself together. "Yes, Amelia. Just a slight unease. It'll pass soon." But as the night wore on, Richard felt more and more disconnected. The smiles around him seemed empty, the laughter forced. He found himself observing the faces of the guests, looking for something, anything, that seemed genuine. In a moment of stillness, Richard stepped out onto the balcony, seeking some fresh air. The city stretched out below him, a carpet of twinkling lights. He should have felt on top of the world, but all he felt was an overwhelming emptiness. His thoughts turned to Sarah and Emily. Where would they be now? What would Emily be like? It had been so long. Richard closed his eyes, remembering the day he left home, convinced that success and wealth were more important than his family. How foolish he had been. The sound of laughter coming from the lounge brought him back to the present. Richard took a deep breath, straightened his posture, and prepared to return to the party. But something had changed. The mask of contentment he had worn for years was beginning to crack. As he mingled with the guests again, Richard found himself doing something he hadn't done for a long time. He began to observe, really observing. He saw the loneliness in the eyes of some executives, the barely disguised desperation of young entrepreneurs trying to impress, the fatigue in the expressions of the staff serving the party. It was then that the realization hit him full force. All that success, all that wealth, for what? What had he really achieved? When the party finally came to an end and the last guest left, Richard found himself alone in his vast apartment. The silence was deafening. He walked to his study and opened a locked drawer. Inside, a yellowed photograph stared back at him, Sarah smiling, holding a baby Emily in her arms. Richard traced the outlines of the faces with his finger, feeling an emotion he hadn't experienced for a long time. Regret, yes, but also something else. A glimmer of hope, perhaps. A chance of redemption. That night, while the city slept outside, Richard Lawson made a decision. It was time to face his past and try to mend what he had broken. But he had no idea of the challenges and revelations that awaited him on this journey of self-discovery and reconciliation. The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains of the small seaside house, illuminating Sarah Lawson's face. At 45, she still maintained a serene beauty, although the lines around her eyes told stories of laughter and tears. Sarah stretched, feeling the salty breeze coming in through the ajar window. She went downstairs, her bare feet touching the worn wooden floor. The house, although modest, was welcoming, a refuge that she and Emily had built up over the years. In the kitchen, Sarah prepared her breakfast, watching the waves breaking on the beach from the window. As she savored her cup of coffee, her eyes fell on a dusty box in the corner of the room. How long had it been since she had opened that box? Sarah hesitated for a moment before getting up and walking over to it. Carefully, she removed the lid, revealing stacks of yellowed envelopes, the letters she had written to Richard over the years, but had never had the courage to send. With trembling hands, Sarah picked up one of the letters. The date in the top right-hand corner took her back to a difficult time, just 6 months after Richard had left. Taking a deep breath, she began to read aloud. Dear Richard, Emily took her first steps today. I so wished you were here to see it. She staggered across the room, laughing and holding out her arms to me. For a moment, I thought I saw your eyes in her, that glint of determination you've always had. How did things change so quickly? Sometimes I wake up thinking you're still by my side, only to be reminded of the cold, empty reality. Sarah stopped, her voice choked with emotion. She remembered those first months of loneliness, struggling to raise Emily alone while trying to understand why Richard had chosen his ambition over his family. Putting the letter aside, Sarah picked up another. This one dated 3 years after Richard's departure. Richard, Emily asked about you today. Mommy, why doesn't Daddy love us? How do you explain to a 4-year-old that sometimes people make choices that hurt those they love? I told her that you love us in your own way, even though you're far away. I don't know if I believe that, but I want her to have hope. I want to believe that one day you'll realize what you've left behind. Silent tears streamed down Sarah's face as she leafed through more letters. Each one was a chapter in the life she and Emily had built without Richard. The anniversaries, the nights of nightmares, the moments of joy, and the daily struggles. One letter in particular caught her eye. It was more recent, written just a year ago. Richard, Emily is becoming an incredible artist. Her talent amazes me every day. Yesterday, she showed me a painting she'd done, a lonely man looking out to sea. When I asked her what it was about, she said, "It's how I imagine Dad, Mom, alone even surrounded by success." I was speechless. Our daughter, even without really knowing you, seems to understand something that perhaps you yourself don't realize. Sarah closed her eyes, letting the memories envelop her. She remembered the happy times with Richard, before ambition consumed him. The idealistic young man who dreamed of changing the world through technology. The man who made her laugh with silly jokes. The father who sang out-of-tune lullabies to baby Emily. The sound of footsteps upstairs brought her back to the present. Emily was awake. Sarah quickly put the letters back in the box, wiping away her tears. She got up, determined to start the day with a smile for her daughter. As she prepared Emily's breakfast, Sarah reflected on how much their lives had changed. The pain of Richard's departure had never completely disappeared, but she and Emily had found strength in each other. Together, they had built a life full of love, creativity, and resilience. The sound of Emily coming down the stairs filled the house. Sarah smiled, feeling a surge of love and pride. Her daughter was her masterpiece, living proof that even in the most difficult circumstances, love could flourish. "Good morning, Mom," Emily said, entering the kitchen with a sleepy smile. Sarah hugged her, inhaling the familiar scent of paint and sea that always accompanied her daughter. "Good morning, my love. Ready for a new day?" As mother and daughter sat down to breakfast, Sarah couldn't help thinking about the letters in the box. Perhaps one day, when the time was right, she would share them with Emily. For now, they would remain a silent testimony to her journey, a journey of pain, but also of unconditional love and growth. The day was just beginning, and with it, new possibilities. Sarah didn't know what the future held, but she was grateful for the present she had built with Emily. And who knows, perhaps the echo of regret she felt in Richard would finally bring him back to them, to rediscover what really mattered in life. Emily's studio was a sanctuary of creativity, a small attic transformed into a space where art and emotions merged on vibrant canvases. Afternoon sunlight poured in through a skylight, illuminating dust particles that danced in the air, mixed with the smell of fresh paint and turpentine. Emily, now 22, was standing in front of a large canvas, her intense eyes focused on the image taking shape under her deft hands. Her dark brown hair was tied up in a messy bun, paint stains dotted her work overalls. She looked like a younger version of Sarah, but her eyes were unmistakably Richard's. With fluid, precise movements, Emily applied strokes of deep blue and stormy gray to the canvas. The image that emerged was of a solitary figure on a rough sea, struggling against furious waves. The figure's face was indistinct, but its posture conveyed a palpable sense of struggle and determination. Emily paused for a moment, stepping back to examine her work. Her eyes narrowed, critically assessing every detail. Without realizing it, she muttered to herself, "Is this how you feel, Dad? Lost in a sea of your own creation?" For as long as she could remember, Emily had used her art to process the complex emotions related to her absent father. Each brushstroke was an attempt to understand, to give tangible form to the feelings that often confused and tormented her. Returning to the canvas, Emily began to work on the details of the stormy sky. As she painted, memories and thoughts flowed through her like the waves on the canvas. She remembered when she was little, asking her mother about her father. Sarah's answers were always kind, but Emily could feel the pain behind the words. Over time, she learned not to ask so often, channeling her curiosity and pain into art. As she grew up, Emily researched Richard Lawson on the internet, articles about his business achievements, photos of him at glamorous events. It all seemed so far removed from her seaside reality with Sarah. She wondered if he ever thought about them, if he missed the family he had left behind. Emily dipped her brush into a bright red, adding touches of color to the horizon of the painting. The red seemed to bleed into the sky, symbolizing the anger she sometimes felt. Anger at being abandoned, anger at seeing her mother struggle alone, anger at never having truly known her father. But along with the anger, there was a deep sadness and longing that Emily hardly dared admit to herself, the desire to meet the man who was half of her, to understand his choices, to perhaps one day hear from him why he left. As she worked, Emily lost herself in her thoughts. She thought of all the times she had seen other children with their parents, in parks, at school art exhibitions, at graduations. Richard's absence was a constant presence in her life, a void she tried to fill with colors and shapes. Hours passed, and the sun began to set, casting a golden glow through the skylight. Emily finally stepped back, exhausted but satisfied. The painting was complete. On the canvas, the solitary figure was now surrounded by a sky that was transforming from stormy to serene. Rays of light penetrated the dark clouds, suggesting hope amid the chaos. The waves, although still choppy, seemed to be calming down. Emily looked at her creation, feeling a mixture of emotions. The painting was more than a representation of her absent father. It was a reflection of her own journey, the struggles, the loneliness, but also the resilience and hope that she and her mother had cultivated over the years. A light tap on the door brought her out of her thoughts. "Emily?" Sarah's soft voice echoed through the studio. "May I come in?" "Of course, Mom," Emily replied, wiping her hands on a nearby cloth. Sarah entered, her eyes immediately drawn to the new painting. She was silent for a moment, absorbing the powerful image before her. Emily watched her mother's face, seeing a myriad of emotions pass through it. Recognition, sadness, pride. "It's beautiful, darling," Sarah finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've really captured something profound here." Emily smiled softly. "Thanks, Mom. I guess I needed to get that out of my system." Sarah moved closer, putting an arm around her daughter's shoulders. "Your art has always been your way of expressing what words can't say. I'm so proud of you, Emily. Not just for your talent, but for your strength." The two stood there, gazing at the painting in silence. Emily felt a wave of gratitude for her mother, for her unwavering support, for her quiet strength. At the same time, she couldn't help but wonder if one day Richard would see her art, if he would understand the emotions she poured into each canvas. "Shall we have dinner?" Sarah asked gently, breaking the silence. Emily nodded, taking one last look at the painting before following her mother out of the studio. As she descended the stairs, she felt a strange sense of anticipation, as if something was about to change. Little did she know that, miles away, her father was beginning his own journey of self-discovery, a journey that would soon intertwine their paths in ways neither of them could have predicted. The morning sun bathed the small art gallery in golden hues, illuminating the white walls where dozens of paintings were waiting to be hung. Sarah Lawson, with her hair up in a loose bun and wearing jeans and a simple blouse, moved around the space with a nervous, excited energy. "Emily, darling, do you think we should put the Time Waves series on the main wall or distribute it around the gallery?" Sarah asked, turning to her daughter who was carefully unpacking a canvas. Emily looked up, a lock of hair falling over her face. I think it would look more impressive on the main wall, Mom. That way people can see the progression of images all at once. Sarah nodded, a proud smile lighting up her face. This exhibition was the culmination of years of hard work and dedication, not only from Emily as an artist, but also from Sarah as her tireless supporter and now show organizer. As the two worked in harmony, preparing the gallery for the opening night, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought them there. She remembered Emily's first paintings, colorful scribbles on the fridge that evolved into sophisticated, emotionally charged works of art. "You know, Emily," Sarah said, pausing to admire a particularly moving painting of a lonely lighthouse. "Sometimes I wonder what your father would think if he saw how talented you've become." Emily tensed for a moment, her eyes meeting Sarah's. "Do you think he'd mind?" she asked, her voice a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Sarah sighed, choosing her words carefully. "Your father always had an eye for beauty, even if he sometimes lost sight of what really mattered. I'm sure he'd be impressed by your art." A contemplative silence fell over them, broken only by the sound of approaching footsteps. Amelia, the gallery's young assistant, hurried in. "Sarah, Emily, you won't believe it. The New York Times art critic has confirmed her attendance for tonight," Amelia exclaimed, her eyes shining with excitement. The news sent a shockwave through the room. Sarah and Emily exchanged looks of surprise and nervousness. This was an incredible opportunity, but it also significantly increased the pressure on the show. Wow," Emily muttered, running a hand through her hair. "I think we need to make sure everything is perfect." Sarah nodded, feeling a mixture of pride and anxiety. "We'll do it together, like we always have." The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Paintings were hung with millimeter precision, lighting adjusted to bring out every nuance of the works, labels carefully placed. Sarah watched Emily moving around the gallery, adjusting almost imperceptible details in her paintings, and felt her heart swell with love and admiration. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the gallery, Sarah and Emily finally stepped back to admire her work. The exhibition was a visual journey, each painting telling a part of Emily's story, her struggle, her search for identity, her complex relationship with her father's absence, and the strength she found along the way. "It's perfect," Sarah whispered, putting an arm around Emily's shoulders. Emily tilted her head to rest against her mother. "I couldn't have done this without you, Mom. Thank you for always believing in me." The two shared a moment of silence, absorbing the magnitude of what they had accomplished together. The sound of Amelia clearing her throat brought them back to the present. "Sorry to interrupt, but I think you two should go and get ready. The guests will start arriving in an hour." Sarah and Emily separated, exchanging nervous smiles before heading to the back of the gallery to get ready for the evening. As she got ready, Sarah couldn't help but think of Richard. Part of her wished he could be there to see her daughter's success. Another part feared what his presence might mean after so many years away. Little did she know that, miles away, Richard Lawson was about to make a decision that would change the course of their lives once again. As the sun set completely and the gallery lights were turned on, creating a warm and sophisticated atmosphere, the first guests began to arrive. Sarah and Emily, now dressed elegantly, positioned themselves at the entrance, ready to welcome the visitors. The exhibition, Echoes of the Past, Colors of the Future, was officially open, and with it, a new chapter in the Lawsons' lives was about to begin. The air was filled with anticipation, excitement, and possibilities as mother and daughter prepared to present the world with art that was both an expression of their journey and a portent of things to come. Richard Lawson's office, at the top of the skyscraper that housed Lawson Innovations' headquarters, was a monument to corporate success. Glass, steel, and cutting-edge technology merged in a space that screamed power and innovation. However, on that Friday afternoon, the atmosphere seemed suffocating to its occupant. Richard was sitting in his leather chair, his eyes fixed on the computer screen, but his mind was far away. The words of his friend and advisor, Dr. Marcus Holloway, echoed in his ears. "Richard, you've built an empire, but at what cost? When was the last time you felt truly happy?" With a heavy sigh, Richard turned his chair to face the panoramic view of New York. The city pulsed below, millions of lives in constant motion. Somewhere in that vast urban sea were Sarah and Emily. The pain of absence, which he had suppressed for so long, now consumed him, His fingers drummed restlessly on the arm of the chair before reaching for the mouse. Almost without thinking, he found himself typing Emily Lawson Artist into the search bar. The results surprised him. Images of vibrant, emotionally charged paintings filled the screen, flattering reviews from local galleries. And then an ad caught his eye. Exhibition Echoes of the Past, Colors of the Future, by emerging artist Emily Lawson, opening tonight at the Azure Gallery. Richard's heart raced. His daughter, the little Emily he had left behind, was now a successful artist. A mixture of pride and shame washed over him. He had lost so much. Without thinking twice, Richard picked up the phone. "Amelia, cancel my appointments for tonight, and get the car ready." "But sir, the meeting with the Japanese investors, it can be rescheduled. This is more important." Richard hung up, feeling a mixture of anxiety and determination. He knew he couldn't just show up in Emily and Sarah's lives after so many years, but he needed to see them, even from afar. As he prepared to leave, his gaze fell on a framed photo on his desk, the only visible reminder of his previous life. In it, a much younger Sarah was smiling, holding a baby Emily. Richard touched the glass gently, remembering the day the photo was taken. "I've made so many mistakes," he muttered to himself. The walk to the gallery was a torture of anticipation. Richard felt like an intruder, a stranger about to peek into the life that could have been his. When the car stopped in front of the Azure Gallery, he hesitated. "Sir, would you like me to wait for you?" asked the driver. Richard nodded silently, unable to form words. With hesitant steps, he approached the entrance to the gallery. Inside was a whirlwind of activity. Art critics, collectors, and enthusiasts circulated, admiring the works on display. Richard entered discreetly, his eyes scanning the room for familiar faces. It was then that he saw her. Emily was standing in front of a particularly impressive painting, chatting animatedly with a small group. She was the image of Sarah as a young woman, but with a sparkle in her eyes that was unmistakably hers. Richard felt his heart squeeze. His daughter had become a beautiful and talented woman, and he hadn't been there to see it happen. Moving as if in a trance, he approached one of the paintings. It was a powerful image of a turbulent sea, with a lone figure struggling against the waves. The raw emotion of the piece hit him like a punch in the gut. He recognized the loneliness, the struggle. He recognized himself. "It's impressive, isn't it?" A soft voice next to him surprised him. Richard turned, finding himself face to face with Sarah. She was older, of course, with soft lines around her eyes, but still as beautiful as he remembered. For a moment, they stood there, frozen, the years of separation weighing them down. "Sarah," he finally managed to say, his voice hoarse with emotion. Her eyes widened in recognition and shock. "Richard, what are you doing here?" The tension between them was palpable. Richard struggled to find the right words. I saw about the exhibition online. I needed to see Emily." Sarah crossed her arms, her posture defensive. "After all these years, you just decide to show up?" Richard lowered his gaze, the shame evident on his face. "I know I don't have the right, but Sarah, seeing these paintings, seeing Emily, I realize how much I've lost, how much I've wasted." The silence between them was interrupted by an excited voice approaching. "Mom, you won't believe it. The Times critic loved the Time Waves series." Emily stopped abruptly when she saw the stranger talking to her mother. Her eyes moved from Sarah to Richard, a silent question in her gaze. Sarah took a deep breath, her gaze meeting Richard's briefly before turning to her daughter. "Emily, darling, there's someone you need to meet." The air in the gallery seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken emotions and uncertain possibilities. Richard, Sarah, and Emily were about to embark on an emotional journey that none of them could have predicted, with the power to heal old wounds or open new ones. While the exhibition guests continued to circle around them, oblivious to the drama unfolding, the three Lawsons found themselves at the epicenter of an emotional storm about to erupt. The buzz of the gallery seemed distant as Emily stared at the man in front of her. His eyes, so similar to her own, stared at her with a mixture of anxiety and hope. Time seemed to freeze in that moment, the decades of absence weighing on the air between them. "Emily," Richard began, his voice trembling. My father," Emily added, her voice surprisingly firm. "I know who you are." Sarah placed a protective hand on Emily's shoulder, her eyes alternating between her daughter and her ex-husband. Perhaps we should continue this conversation in a more private place, she suggested, noticing the curious glances that were beginning to turn towards them. Emily nodded stiffly, leading them into a small room at the back of the gallery, normally used for meetings with collectors. As soon as the door closed behind them, the silence became deafening. Richard was the first to break it. Emily, I don't know where to start. Your paintings are incredible. You're amazing. Why are you here? Emily interrupted him, her eyes shining with a mixture of anger and curiosity. After all these years, why now? Richard swallowed, feeling the weight of his choices more than ever. I've made a lot of mistakes, he began, his voice low. I thought that success and money were the most important thing. But seeing your works, seeing you, I realized how much I've lost. Sarah, who had remained silent until then, spoke up. Richard, you can't just show up and expect everything to be fine. Emily grew up without you. We built a life. Sarah's words hit Richard like a punch. He looked around the room, noticing Emily's certificates and awards hanging on the walls. Each one was a reminder of the achievements he hadn't witnessed. I know, he replied, running a hand through his gray hair. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness or to try to get back into your lives. I just needed to see you. I needed you to know that I deeply regret the choices I've made. Emily, who had been watching the interaction with attentive eyes, finally spoke. Do you know how many times I've imagined this moment? How many times I've painted you on my canvases, trying to understand why a father would abandon his family? His voice trembled with restrained emotion. Richard felt his heart squeeze as he saw the pain in his daughter's eyes. Every brushstroke, every color, it was all my way of coping with your absence, Emily continued. And now you're here, looking at me as if you know me. Richard took a hesitant step towards her. I know I have no right to know you, Emily, but if you'll allow me, I'd like to try. The silence that followed was tense. Sarah watched her daughter intently, ready to intervene if necessary. Emily, for her part, seemed to be fighting an internal battle. Finally, she spoke. I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if I ever will, but, she hesitated, glancing at her mother briefly before returning her gaze to Richard. Maybe we can start with you telling me about yourself, the man you became, not the father you failed to be. Richard nodded, grateful for the small opening. I'd love that, he said softly. Sarah snorted, attracting both their attention. Emily, darling, you've got an exhibition going on outside. People waiting to talk to you. Perhaps we could arrange a more appropriate time for this meeting. Emily seemed to suddenly remember where they were and what was happening. You're right, Mom, she said, visibly pulling herself together. Turning to Richard, she added, if you really want to try, we can meet next week. There's a cafe near here. Richard agreed quickly, relief evident on his face. Of course, whenever and wherever you want. As they exchanged contact information, the air in the small room seemed less heavy. There was no forgiveness, not yet, but there was an opening, a possibility. Before they left the room, Emily stopped at the door, turning to Richard one last time. One thing you need to know, she said, her voice firm. The woman I've become, the artist I am, it's thanks to my mother. She was mother and father to me. Never forget that. With those words, she left, leaving Richard and Sarah alone for a moment. Sarah, Richard began, but she interrupted him with a gesture. Not now, Richard. Tonight is about Emily and her conquests. If you really want to be part of our lives in any way, you'll need to prove that you've changed. With actions, not words. Richard nodded, realizing the magnitude of the challenge ahead of him. As Sarah turned to leave, he called out to her one last time. Sarah, thank you, Sarah, for everything you've done for her, for being the incredible mother I knew you would be. Sarah paused for a moment, her back still turned to him. Without turning around, she replied softly, Good night, Richard. And with that, she left, leaving him alone with his thoughts and regrets. Outside, the exhibition continued. Emily's art, born out of years of absence and pain, now served as an unexpected bridge to a possible future, an uncertain future, full of difficult conversations and complex emotions, but a future, nonetheless. Richard left the gallery that night with a heavy heart, but also with a spark of hope. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in years, he felt that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance of redemption. Richard Lawson's office was silent, except for the soft hum of electronic equipment and the occasional clink of ice in a whiskey glass. Sitting in his leather chair, Richard gazed out at the night city through the panoramic window, his mind a whirlwind of emotions after the encounter in the gallery. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he said, his voice tired. Marcus Holloway, his longtime friend and the company's legal advisor, entered the room. His keen eyes immediately noticed Richard's slumped posture and the half-empty glass on his desk. "Rough night?" Marcus asked, taking a seat in the chair opposite the desk. Richard let out a heavy sigh. "You have no idea, Marcus. I saw them. Sarah and Emily." Marcus leaned forward, surprised. "You went to the exhibition? What was it like?" "It was intense," Richard replied, turning the glass in his hands. "Emily is incredible. Marcus. Talented, strong, determined. Everything I always hoped she would be, and I wasn't there to see it. And Sarah?" Richard closed his eyes for a moment. "She's as beautiful as ever. But her eyes, there's a hardness in them now, a strength I've never seen before." Marcus nodded understandingly. "I see. And now, what's the next step?" Before Richard could answer, his phone vibrated. It was a message from an unknown number. "Mr. Lawson, this is Emily. If you're still interested, we can meet at the Blue Cafe next Wednesday at 2 p.m. Richard showed Marcus the message, a mixture of anxiety and hope on his face. "Are you going?" Marcus asked, even though he already knew the answer. "Of course," Richard replied without hesitation. "But Marcus, there's something else you need to know." Richard stood up, walking over to a locked filing cabinet in his office. With slightly trembling hands, he pulled out a folder and handed it to Marcus. "What's this?" Marcus asked, opening the folder. "It's the reason I really left Sarah and Emily," Richard said, his voice almost a whisper. "I never told anyone, not even you." Marcus began to read the documents, his eyes widening as he absorbed the information. "Richard, this is serious. You're telling me that—" "Yes," Richard interrupted him. "I discovered a massive fraud within the company I was about to found. Powerful people were involved. Marcus. People who wouldn't hesitate to hurt my family to silence me. So you left them to protect them," Marcus concluded, understanding forming in his eyes. Richard nodded, the pain evident on his face. "I thought I was doing the right thing, walking away completely, building the company from scratch, clean of any corruption. But in the process, you lost them," Marcus added softly. "Exactly," Richard said, collapsing back into his chair. "And now, after all these years, I don't know if I can tell them the truth. I don't know if it would make any difference." Marcus closed the folder thoughtfully. "Richard, you've carried this secret for a long time. Maybe it's time to share the truth. They deserve to know." "What if it puts them in danger again?" Richard asked, fear evident in his voice. "Do the people involved in that fraud still have power?" Marcus asked. Richard shook his head. "No, most of them are out of business or worse. But fear has never completely left me." Marcus stood up, placing a comforting hand on Richard's shoulder. "My friend, you have a chance to reconnect here, a chance to explain, to try and put things right. Don't waste it because of past fears." Richard nodded slowly, determination beginning to form in his eyes. "You're right. On Wednesday, over coffee, I'll tell Emily everything. She deserves to know the truth, no matter how painful it is." "And Sarah?" Marcus asked. "One step at a time," Richard replied. "First Emily, then, well, I hope I get the chance to tell Sarah too." As Marcus prepared to leave, Richard called him one last time. "Marcus, thank you, Marcus, for everything." Marcus smiled. "That's what friends are for, Richard. Good luck on Wednesday." Alone again in his office, Richard looked at the photo of Sarah and Emily as babies on his desk. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of hope. The road ahead would be difficult, full of painful conversations and long-hidden truths, but it was a road he was determined to travel. With one last look at the city outside, Richard made a silent promise to himself and his family. This time, he would do things differently. This time, he would fight for the chance to be part of their lives, no matter the cost. Wednesday was approaching, and with it, the possibility of redemption. Richard Lawson was ready to face his past and perhaps build a new future. The Café Azul was an oasis of tranquility amidst the hustle and bustle of the city. Emily arrived a few minutes before the agreed time, choosing a discreet table in the corner. Her fingers drummed nervously on her coffee cup as she waited, her eyes alternating between the door and the clock on the wall. At 2 p.m. sharp, Richard entered the cafe. His eyes roamed the room until he found Emily. For a moment, father and daughter stared at each other from a distance, decades of absence and unanswered questions hanging between them. Richard approached, hesitantly. "Hello, Emily. Thank you for agreeing to meet me." Emily nodded, gesturing for him to sit down. "You're punctual. That's good to know." An uncomfortable silence settled as Richard placed his order with the waiter. When they were alone again, Emily was the first to speak. "So," she began, her voice controlled, "you said you wanted to tell me about the man you've become. I'm listening." Richard took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "Emily, before I talk about who I am today, I need to tell you why I did what I did in the past. There are things you and your mother don't know." Emily arched an eyebrow, her curiosity visibly aroused. "Go on." Richard took an envelope from his jacket and placed it on the table. "This contains the real reason why I left you and your mother. It wasn't out of ambition or lack of love. It was to protect them." With trembling hands, Emily opened the envelope and began to read the documents. Her eyes widened as she absorbed the information. "A fraud? Threats?" she muttered, looking at Richard with a mixture of shock and incredulity. Richard nodded gravely. "I uncovered a massive fraud operation involving very powerful people. When I threatened to expose everything, they made it clear that my family would be in danger if I spoke out." Emily let the papers fall onto the table, her mind spinning. "So you left us to protect us?" "Yes," Richard replied, his voice laced with emotion. "I thought that by moving away completely, building my own company from scratch, away from those people, I could keep you safe." Emily was silent for a long moment, processing everything. When she finally spoke, her voice was a mixture of anger and confusion. "Why didn't you tell us? Why did you just disappear without explanation?" Richard lowered his eyes, the shame evident on his face. "I was afraid that if you knew, you'd try to contact me and that could put you at risk. I thought a clean cut would be safer. But then," Emily pressed, "years have passed. Why didn't you come back when the danger passed?" Richard swallowed. "The truth, I was a coward. The more time passed, the harder it became to go back. I convinced myself that you would be better off without me, that I would only bring pain if I reappeared." Emily closed her eyes, taking a deep breath to calm herself. When she opened them again, there was a fierce determination in her gaze. "Do you have any idea what your absence has done to us? The nights I spent crying, wondering why my father didn't love me. Mom struggles to support us on her own." Richard felt every word like a stab in the heart. "I'm so sorry, Emily. More than I can express. I know that my actions have caused immeasurable pain, and I understand if you can't forgive me." A tense silence settled between them. Emily stared at the documents on the table, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Finally, she spoke, her voice low but firm. "I've spent years imagining all the possible reasons for your departure. I've painted pictures trying to understand, trying to give shape to my pain. And now you're telling me it was to protect us." Richard nodded silently, waiting for his daughter's verdict. Emily continued, her voice gaining strength. "Part of me wants to shout at you, tell you that you should have found another way. But another part understands the impossibility of the situation you were in." She looked directly into Richard's eyes, her expression a complex mix of emotions. "I can't say I forgive you, not yet, but I thank you for finally telling me the truth. It's a start." Richard felt a wave of relief and hope. "It's more than I deserve, Emily. Thank you for listening to me." Emily took the documents, carefully storing them in her bag. "I'm going to need time to process all this. And Mom, she needs to know too." Richard nodded. "Of course. When you're ready, I'd like to tell her myself. She deserves to hear it from me." As they prepared to leave the cafe, Emily stopped, turning to Richard one last time. "One thing I've learned from my art is that sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that make you question everything you thought you knew. Today you've rewritten our family history. Now it's up to us to decide how we want it to continue." With those words, Emily left the cafe, leaving Richard with a mixture of regret for the past and cautious hope for the future. The truth had been revealed, but the road ahead was still uncertain. However, for the first time in years, there was the possibility of healing and reconciliation. Richard watched his daughter walk away, knowing that this was only the first step on a long journey. But it was a step he was grateful to have had the chance to take. Sarah was sitting on the balcony of her seaside home, the sound of the waves breaking on the beach serving as a backdrop to her tumultuous thoughts. In her hands, she held the documents that Emily had given her the night before, after returning from her meeting with Richard. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, but Sarah hardly noticed the beauty around her. Her mind was caught up in the revelations contained in those papers, rewriting 2 decades of assumptions and hurt. The sound of footsteps on the sand brought her out of her reverie. Emily approached, 2 steaming cups of tea in her hands. "Hey, Mom," Emily said softly, handing one of the cups to Sarah before sitting down next to her. "How are you?" Sarah let out a deep sigh, her eyes still fixed on the horizon. "Honestly, I don't know, darling. It's a lot to process." Emily nodded, understanding. "I know. When Richard told me, I felt as if the ground had disappeared from under my feet." Sarah finally turned to face her daughter, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "All those years, I thought he just didn't care enough, that we weren't enough for him." "Me too, Mom," Emily admitted, placing a comforting hand over Sarah's. "But now everything has changed," Sarah added. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the memories flow. "I remember the night he left. There was something in his eyes. Fear, perhaps. At the time, I interpreted it as guilt. But now," Emily gently squeezed her mother's hand. "What do you think we should do now?" Sarah opened her eyes, staring at her daughter with a mixture of determination and uncertainty. "I think we need to listen to him, Emily. Hear the full story directly from him." Emily nodded, a small smile forming on her lips. "I was hoping you'd say that. Actually, I've already contacted him." Sarah arched an eyebrow in surprise. "You did?" "Yes," Emily confirmed. "I asked him to come over tomorrow. I thought it would be better if we talked somewhere where we felt safe and comfortable." Sarah was silent for a moment, absorbing the information. Finally, she said, "You're right. It's time we face this head on." The 2 women sat there, watching the sun go down completely, each lost in their own thoughts. Tomorrow would bring a long-delayed confrontation, a chance to heal old wounds and perhaps build something new from the ruins of the past. The next morning, the tension was palpable in the house by the sea. Sarah moved restlessly around the kitchen, arranging and rearranging cups and plates without really seeing what she was doing. Emily, meanwhile, was sitting on the sofa in the living room, distractedly leafing through one of her sketchbooks. The sound of an approaching car made them both freeze. They exchanged a quick glance before Emily got up to open the door. Richard was standing outside, looking older and more tired than ever. In his hands, he held a thick folder and what looked like an old photo album. "Hello?" he said softly, his voice laden with nervousness. "May I come in?" Emily nodded, taking a step to the side. "Of course. Mom's in the kitchen." Richard entered hesitantly, his eyes roaming the room, absorbing every detail of the life Sarah and Emily had built without him. When he reached the kitchen and saw Sarah, they both stood still for a moment, the weight of 2 decades of separation hanging between them. "Sarah," Richard finally managed to say, his voice almost a whisper. "Richard," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "I think we have a lot to talk about." The 3 of them sat down in the living room, the silence initially oppressive. Richard opened the folder he had brought, spreading out more documents on the coffee table. "I've brought everything," he began. "All the evidence, all the details of the fraud I've uncovered. I want you to know exactly what happened and why." Over the next few hours, Richard told his full story. He talked about the threats, the constant fear, the sleepless nights worrying about Sarah and Emily's safety. He explained how he had built his company from scratch, always looking over his shoulder, always fearing that his past would catch up with them. Sarah and Emily listened attentively, occasionally asking questions, their expressions varying between shock, anger, and, at times, reluctant understanding. When Richard finally finished, the sun was already high in the sky. A heavy silence fell over the room. It was Sarah who broke it. "Why, Richard? Why didn't you trust me enough to tell me? We could have faced this together." The pain in her voice was palpable, making Richard visibly cringe. "I was so afraid, Sarah," he admitted, his voice breaking. "Afraid that if you knew, You would insist on staying by my side, afraid that they might hurt you or Emily to get to me. I thought that keeping them in the dark was the only way to keep them safe. Emily, who had been silent for a while, finally spoke up. But then what? When the danger passed, why didn't it come back to us? Richard lowered his eyes, the shame evident on his face. Because I was a coward. The more time passed, the harder it became to go back. I convinced myself that you would be better off without me, that I would only bring more pain if I reappeared in your lives. Sarah stood up abruptly and walked over to the window. When she turned around, there were tears in her eyes, but also a fierce determination. You robbed us of the chance to choose, Richard, she said. You stole years from us that we can never get back. But, she paused, taking a deep breath, but you also protected us from a danger we didn't know about. It's complicated. Richard nodded, accepting her words. I know, and I understand if you can't forgive me. I just wanted you to know the truth. Emily stood up, walking over to stand between her parents. I think we all need time to process this, but maybe we can try to build something new from here. Sarah and Richard exchanged a look, years of hurt, love, and regret passing between them in an instant. I'd like that, Richard said softly. Sarah hesitated for a moment before nodding. One step at a time, she agreed. As the day progressed, the three Lawsons began to navigate the unknown waters of their new reality. There were no guarantees, no promises of a happy ending, but there was a chance of healing, of understanding, and perhaps of redemption. The past had been revealed, and now it was up to them to decide how they would write their future. The months that followed Richard's revelation were an emotional roller coaster for the Lawson family. Tense meetings, difficult conversations, and moments of gradual understanding alternated as everyone tried to navigate this new territory. It was an autumn afternoon when Emily invited her parents to visit her new studio. The space, located in an old renovated warehouse, was spacious and bright, with large windows that let in the golden late afternoon light. Sarah and Richard arrived separately, still uncomfortable with the idea of coming together. Emily welcomed them with a nervous smile, aware of the importance of this moment. Welcome to my new space, she said, leading them inside. I have something to show you. In the center of the studio, covered by a large white cloth, was what appeared to be a sizable canvas. Emily took a deep breath before removing the cloth, revealing her latest work. The painting was breathtaking. It depicted three figures on a beach at sunset. On the left, a middle-aged woman gazed at the horizon, her posture a mixture of strength and vulnerability. On the right, a gray-haired man looked at the other two figures, his face a mask of regret and hope. In the center, with her back to the viewer, was a young woman, her arms outstretched as if trying to unite the other two figures. Sarah put her hand to her mouth, tears shining in her eyes. Richard stood motionless, absorbing every detail of the painting. I call it reconciliation, Emily explained softly. It's how I see our family now, separated by years of pain and secrets, but still connected, still with the possibility of being reunited. Richard was the first to speak, his voice laced with emotion. It's beautiful, Emily. You've captured everything. Sarah nodded, unable to form words for a moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was a whisper. It's as if you've painted our hearts. Emily smiled, feeling the weight of the last few weeks lighten a little. I wanted to create something that represented our journey, not just the painful past, but also the hope for the future. The three of them sat in silence for a long moment, contemplating the painting and everything it represented. Finally, Richard turned to Sarah and Emily. I know we still have a long way to go, he began, his voice shaky but determined, but I want you to know that I'm committed to being a part of your lives, if you'll let me. Not to erase the past, but to build something new. Sarah looked at him, years of complex emotions flashing through her eyes. It won't be easy, Richard. There's a lot of pain, a lot of lost years. I know, he replied, and I accept that. All I ask is for the chance to try. Emily stepped forward, putting herself between her parents. Maybe we can start with something small. A family dinner once a week. Sarah and Richard exchanged a look, a silent communication passing between them. Finally, Sarah nodded. I think we could try that. A small smile formed on Richard's lips. I'd love to. Emily felt a wave of relief and hope. Great. How about we start next Friday? I can cook. Are you sure? Sarah asked, a touch of humor in her voice. I remember a few cooking incidents in the past. Emily laughed, the sound breaking the remaining tension in the room. Hey, I've improved. Besides, we can always order food if it goes wrong. Richard smiled, feeling part of something for the first time in years. I can't wait. As the sun set outside, painting the sky with colors that rivaled Emily's canvas, the Lawson family took their first hesitant steps towards a new beginning. In the weeks and months that followed, Friday dinners became a ritual. Sometimes they were tense moments, with difficult conversations and emotions running high. Other times, they were filled with laughter and shared stories, bridges slowly being rebuilt. Emily continued to paint, her art evolving to reflect her family's healing journey. Sarah found the strength to forgive, even though the process was slow and sometimes painful. And Richard, determined not to waste his second chance, dedicated himself to regaining his family's trust, one day at a time. A year after the revelation that changed everything, Emily held her biggest exhibition yet. In the center of the gallery, reconciliation took pride of place. Next to it, a new painting, 3 figures holding hands, walking towards a bright horizon. When visitors asked about the meaning behind the works, Emily smiled and replied, "It's a story about second chances, about the power of truth and the strength of family love. It's about learning that sometimes endings are just new beginnings in disguise." And as Sarah and Richard stood side by side, watching their daughter with pride, they both knew that, despite the challenges they would still face, they were on the right path. The echo of regret that had haunted them for so long was beginning to change into a new melody, one of hope, forgiveness, and endless possibilities. If you were in Richard's shoes, having to choose between protecting your family by keeping a painful secret or sharing the truth at the risk of your safety, what would you do? How could that decision shape the rest of your life and that of your loved ones? Leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.